Hello, welcome to this week's lesson. We are going to be looking at critical analysis. So this is just an introduction to critical analysis. We will use critical analysis then to write our next essay. Before we begin this lesson, I want to make sure that you're prepared, so you can take a moment to either pause the video or gather the things that you will need in order to take notes. It's going to be important that you have these notes as you walk through this essay, because prior to us being able to write a critical analysis, we need to make sure we understand what that means and what that is. So we're going to talk a little bit later about some of the steps that we need in order to critically analyze. So there's two guiding questions for this particular lesson. The first is, what is critical analysis? We're going to define it. And the next one is, what are the steps to critically analyze, or what are the steps to critical analysis? So let's begin with a definition. We're going to talk about it in a couple different ways, but when we think about critical analysis, we're looking at it as a way to break down an issue or a cultural artifact, such as a text, a painting, music, a movie, an ad, or other cultural artifacts. We break them down into different components, usually by considering its various aspects or parts, and then we present this exploration to the reader. So critical analysis essay, when we get to it later on, will be doing just that, breaking something down and analyzing it, evaluating it for our reader. So in this case, it goes beyond summary or description. That is not to say that summary or description isn't a part of it, because if you think about the shaping of how you would analyze something, your audience would need some amount of summary or description prior to you analyzing it or breaking it down. So when we think about critical analysis, think about it as something that explains, examines, and evaluates, right? If you're explaining something, you're giving the description or summary, but then you're taking it into pieces and you're examining it. So think about putting it under a microscope. And then based on those pieces and that microscope and that examination, you're evaluating it. And that's where the critical comes in. And critical doesn't necessarily mean, in this context, critical is not a negative or positive. It could be either or both. Critical just means that you are evaluating something. You're not taking something at face value. You're looking at things beyond what's given. So in essence, we are looking at it as a way to ask all of these questions: the who, what, when, why. The why and the how are really important. Those are the questions that bring us into the examination and the evaluation part. So when we look at the difference between, let's say, summary description and critical analysis, I have a quick column here, or two columns, I should say, that allows us to see these things kind of side by side. So for example, in a summary description, we merely state what happened, right? But in a critical analysis, we would state what happened, but then we would identify the significance. So you can see how the critical analysis would definitely bring it beyond what you are reading, what you are seeing. States what something is like versus taking it beyond that, evaluating the strengths and the weaknesses. So what about gives the story so far? And then weighing one piece of information against another. Let's keep going. States the order in which things happened. And then using that in order to make reasoned judgments or logical judgments or drawing logical conclusions, which we'll see later on as well. Says how to do something, so by giving someone a process, but then also argues a case according to the evidence. So based on the evidence, did the artifact that you are critically analyzing make its case? Explain how something works, and then taking it beyond and saying why something will work best based on the evidence given. List details, evaluates the relative significance of those details. So not only gives us the information, but now you're going to evaluate the significance or the relative significance of those details. The last one, list details in any order. versus drawing conclusions and discussing the importance of order as listed. Now, this is just a brief list, and we'll come back to it. By no means an exhaustive list with regards to critical analysis, but it certainly gives us an idea of what I mean when I say we're going to go and step outside or beyond the artifact that we're going to look at. So let's keep going just a little more. When we think about critical analysis, it doesn't necessarily seek to sell an idea or persuade. However, it can draw fact-based conclusions after the completion of the analysis, which then in turn, based on your analysis, could in fact persuade your audience as to the validity of your critical analysis. Since critical includes a subjective dimension, subjective meaning you are evaluating it based on your understanding, your personal experiences, maybe your understanding of the issue or the background information that you might have on something. The analysis should be organized in a logical way to convey the ideas of the analysis in a convincing manner. So while when we go to that first point that it doesn't seek to sell an idea or persuade, it actually does. It just does it in a different way because you are using your ability to analyze and then your ability to organize logically that analysis, and that is what persuades the audience. So let's look at an approach to critical analysis. The approach to the critical analysis is going to be slightly different depending on whether or not you're going to choose an issue or a cultural artifact to analyze. However, um, they both do the same thing in that they are going to break something down, allow you to examine it, and allow you to evaluate it. If we're looking at critical analysis of a particular issue, then we're going to be looking at things like examining the background or the history of the issue, explaining its relevance, researching benefits and disadvantages, exploring cause and effect, and analyzing any solutions. Some of this will come into play for our critical analysis essay, and others won't. However, if you notice, each of these pieces and parts, these bullet points, are all so that one, you're equipped with the information that you need in order to then analyze a particular text or artifact. So when we think about being critical, let's talk about it. Here's some quick quotes. Because, as I stated earlier, being critical does not necessarily mean that you are being critical to the negative. What it means in this context is, if you look at that first bullet point, adopting an attitude of skepticism or reasoned doubt towards your own and others' knowledge in the field of inquiry. So think about it as a way of not taking something at face value. Always thinking about what is being left out, what assumptions are being made. Habitually questioning the quality of your own and other specific claims to knowledge about the field and the means by which these claims were generated. Again, if you notice, each one of these is just a matter of being inquisitive, and then always thinking beyond what it is you're looking at. Scrutinizing claims to see how far they are convincing. Respecting others as people at all times. Challenging others' works is acceptable, but challenging their worth as people is not. And that is something that is very important. When we're critically analyzing something, we are doing it as a way to respect others' views and others' beliefs and valuing those as a voice at the table of the conversation. Critically analyzing just provides an opportunity to ask the questions that you might have in order to begin to connect. Being open minded, willing to be convinced if scrutiny removes your doubts or to remain unconvinced if it does not. And this is probably one of the hardest things to do because most of the time we'll walk into something and we already have this preconceived idea of what something is or what something should be. We have our own beliefs. We walk into those with everything that we do. Being able to be critical means that you're open minded, means that you're going to listen to and value those who may not have the same opinion. And If we're open-minded, we will listen and base an evaluation based on listening to those other things. Can we be convinced of a different opinion? Being constructive by putting your attitude of skepticism and your open-mindedness to work in attempting to achieve a worthwhile goal. That last bullet point definitely will kind of encapsulate this entire slide. So I'll read it again. Being constructive by putting your attitude of skepticism and your open-mindedness to work in attempting to achieve a worthwhile goal. If we are critically analyzing, what we are doing is trying to step beyond, think through, evaluate, examine in order to create some type of overarching analysis or thesis regarding what it is we are analyzing. So here's some questions to ask in a critical analysis. And again, this particular lesson is merely meant to get us thinking in this direction. We will begin to narrow this as we move along this particular project. But when we are looking at some of the questions to ask in a critical analysis, of course, some of these, as we said, are going to be summary description. They have to be because you have to have that first and foremost. And we'll get to that when we look at the steps in just a minute. So who is the author or artist, and what are her qualifications, meaning how was it that they came to create this? What is the nature of the work? Looking at the type, the purpose, the intended audience, all of those are very important. What is its significance? How does it compare to other material on the same subject by the same author? The idea of significance is really important when it comes to the critical analysis. What is the author or artist's central point or thesis, central purpose of what they're doing? Again, before we can analyze something, we've got to be able to look at it in summary or description before we can pull it apart. What is the organizational plan or method? Is it well conceived? Does it achieve the author's objectives? So more questions that may be used in what we are going to do with critical analysis. What are the underlying assumptions? Are they stated or do they lurk behind a stance of neutrality and objectivity? How do assumptions and biases affect the validity of the piece? Those two questions will definitely come into play in our project. Are arguments or statements supported by evidence? Is the evidence relevant or sufficient? Is the author or artist's methodology sound? What evidence or ideas has the author or artist failed to consider? We're always looking at where are the holes? What has not been considered in this particular idea? Are the author's or artist's judgments and conclusions valid? Again, you can see where those questions lead you to an analysis because you have to begin to assign some kind of judgment or evaluation based on the evidence of the artifact. What rhetorical strategies does the author or artist use? Are they effective? For example, are they appealing to our emotions? Are they providing the logic or statistics or facts in order to convince us of something? Let's take a quick example. Take a look at this ad. We want to look at three things. What is the purpose of the ad? What does it use? And how do you know? So the ad, just simply a hand holding a Marlboro box of cigarettes, but instead of the cigarettes, crayons are in there. And it says, do you want them to take after everything you do? And then down at the bottom, real little, it says, quit today. So if we look at the purpose of this ad, the purpose of this ad is to convince the audience to stop smoking. What does it use in order to do this? Well, there's a lot of emotional appeals in this. So what are some of the emotional appeals? Well, first and foremost, you see a box of cigarettes that is then filled with crayons. What do we associate with crayons? We associate children. And so when we look at this from an emotional standpoint, it would certainly tug on a heartstring to think that we have small children or young children who are using tobacco because of an example that somebody in their life who is older has set. Look at some of the coloring. So we have a black background, we have white lettering, so it stands out. We also have the box, which is black and white, and the only thing different are the crayons. The crayons are very colorful and vibrant. Again, it's bringing us into that idea of really drawing the eyes to the crayons, associating the crayons with children, and looking at the dramatic effect, the emotional effect that this would have. Take a look at the font. Do you want them to take after everything that you do? The font is written in somewhat of a chalkboard font style. Same thing with Quit Today. So what does that do? Once again, we're drawn to that idea or reference of children. Even the way the letters are written draws us to this more um, elementary school kind of chalkboard um, idea, if you will, drawing again on the heartstrings regarding children and smoking. Let's take a look at another one. So we have a Burger King ad. If we look at the purpose of the ad, clearly it is to purchase more Burger King French fries, right? So what do we see? Well, we see that they have used statistics along with other things, but statistics because they're saying it's 40% less fat, 30% less calories, but big taste, right? Um, so they're using some logos because they're giving you statistics on the nutritional value of these. Their top phrase, "Big taste, less fat," is trying to appeal to the French fry lover in all of us. So that essentially giving us this message of don't feel guilty about these fries. It's also communicating in somewhat of the message with, let's say, a specific age demographic, with the use of the logo for Instagram, also with the hashtag. So again, it's drawing us then to the digital side and creating this kind of pop culture feel of circulating this hashtag satisfied. So this particular ad is doing a lot in order to convey its message. Now, while we did pull these things apart, we certainly didn't then evaluate them or draw some kind of a conclusion. Our conclusion for both of these would be then, how well do you think they did in these two? Did they convey their message? Was their purpose clear? How do you think they did with regards to the use of the different methods? For example, Burger King using statistics. This particular ad, which is a public service announcement, um, targeting the um, the parent in all of us, so to speak, or just this identity with small children and smoking. Let's look at one more. So we want to look at the purpose of this ad, what it uses, and how do you know? So this is a particular ad from the 50s by Del Monte. You can see the logo on the bottle. And it was for a twist off cap on their ketchup. So what do we see? The phrase at the bottom, you mean a woman can open it? And the woman is underlined. And then you look at her particular facial expressions. Now, I chose this ad purposely because of the gender norms that it portrays with regards to you mean a woman can open it. We look at this in where we are in 2020, and it would probably invoke some amount of anger or rage in some of us regarding what this is assuming. So, if we talk about assumptions, assuming that a woman couldn't possibly open another type of bottle because they are, as classified here, the weaker gender. Therefore, they need something that is easy to open. So, this particular ad, what are they using? If we look at it through the lens of our 2020 vision, then we see a lot of gender roles being assumed in this particular ad, and we could pull them apart. The use of the yellow in the background, her facial expression. You notice that even her hair and her makeup is taking on that kind of traditional 1950s woman's role that was portrayed a lot back then in different ads. And then, of course, the question at the bottom, you mean a woman can open it? Suggesting that it is so easy that even the weaker gender of a woman could open it. So, what we didn't do then again with this one is to evaluate it or critique it on the lens of what we think about that. That will come next. So when we look at the essentials of critical analysis, we want to think that critical analysis is always written after careful scrutiny of the subject along with detailed evaluation. So before we even begin to think about an essay that is using critical analysis, we've got to begin first and foremost by making sure that we understand it. Therefore, we're going to be critically reading, critically thinking, then we can begin to critically write our analysis essay. Thank you for watching this, and go ahead and head back to Canvas now, continue with this week's module, and I look forward to our continued conversation as we move through critical analysis.